Here is everything that you need to know about the present subjunctive. Hola, hola. Soy Senorita Spanish. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, it's so great to see you. Go ahead and click that like button, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel for more videos. And don't forget to click on that notification bell so that you can be notified every time a new video drops, because my channel exists to help CSEC learners just like you. However, this video in particular is a major grammar topic in Spanish, and so my hope and desire is that it will help any Spanish learner across the world. So welcome again, and let's jump right into what exactly is the present subjunctive, why do you need to learn it, and why is it so important? The first question I aim to answer is, what is the subjunctive? ¿Qué es el subjuntivo? Well, the subjunctive is what we call a mood in Spanish and not necessarily a tense, because it is used to express uncertainty, doubt, wants, wishes, emotions, or future actions. It mostly expresses the hypothetical, things that may not happen although it is desired. For example, I may say I want you to study, but you may or may not do it. So the word to study would be conjugated in the present subjunctive just because it's something that might not or might happen. Therefore, the subjunctive consists of two clauses. The first clause is the first person wanting something, desiring something, recommending or advising or wishing something on another person. And the second clause is where the subjunctive conjugation would be placed in the second part of the sentence. Now let's go into exactly what I'm talking about. Let's start with the first clause. Now, each sentence has two parts. The first part of the sentence is what I like to call the setup part, where in the first part of the sentence, you can identify the setup word that actually helps you to trigger or to predict when the subjunctive is necessary. So these setup words are used in the first clause of a sentence to set up the use of the subjunctive in the second clause. And don't worry, we're going to figure this out very soon. You're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, as I said before, what is said after these setup words may or may not happen. And so the subjunctive is that conjugation which occurs after the setup word. So the first part of the sentence, we will have set up verbs or set up phrases that might include verbs like the ones on the screen. Querer, to want. I want you to wash the dishes, for example. Sugerir, to suggest. I suggest that you clean your room. Recomendar, to recommend. I recommend that we go out to eat tonight. Insistir en, to insist that someone does something. Esperar, to hope that someone does something. And one of my favorites, ojalá que, which is hopefully, or it's hopeful that something might happen. And as I'm elaborating here, I hope you're understanding how the subjunctive sounds. The subjunctive is one person wanting or suggesting or recommending that another person does a particular thing. And that thing that you're suggesting to happen might not happen. And so that is why it's called a mood and not a tense, because it's not a sure thing like the tenses are. Now, let's go deeper into the setup words. Now, we have framed or coined a little lingo called weirdo, where we can identify the major setup words or the major functions of the subjunctive just by remembering weirdo. So if you can remember weirdo, hopefully you'll be able to remember when you need the subjunctive. Let's get right into it. So of course, the first letter is W, and W stands for wants, wishes, hopes, and desires. Now, three major verbs that are used in Spanish to communicate wants or wishes are querer, which is to want, desear, which means to desire, and esperar, which means to hope. So if you see any of these words, that might be a trigger for the subjunctive. And I did say might be because we're going to get into what else constitutes the subjunctive. It's not only the words that we need, but we actually need an entire formation. But let's start here, shall we? So the W stands for wants, wishes, hopes, and desires. In that, somebody is wanting or wishing or hoping or desiring that someone else does a particular thing. And for this function, let's remember and take away these three major verbs: querer, desear, esperar. Do we remember what they mean? Querer is to want, desear is to desire, and esperar is to hope. Muy bien. Now let's go on to E. The E stands for emotions, and that's right. Once you're feeling or having a particular emotion about something that involves another person, it's a subjunctive. So, I am happy that you're here. That's a subjunctive statement because I guess it doesn't really affect how the other person feels. You're just projecting your own emotions onto the situation, right? So, emotions. Once someone is happy or sad or disappointed or excited about another person or another scenario, that is also a space for the subjunctive to be used. Now, I have placed here on the screen many emotions that we can learn, that we need to identify and use if we are ever going to be forming a subjunctive sentence where an emotion is involved. So let's recap some of these words. So of course, the major verb that we use when we're telling emotions is estar, to be happy, sad, angry or mad. Enfadado also means angry or mad. Proud, disappointed, frustrated, surprised, excited, glad, embarrassed. So once somebody is saying, oh, I'm happy that, or I'm sad that, or he is angry that, or they are disappointed that is a setup for the subjunctive to be used in the next clause. Let's look at some phrases that is also linked with this function. So this is a very popular phrase. It's a pity that. Es una lástima que. It's a pity that you failed the exams, for example. Es una vergüenza que. It's a shame that. So these are also, of course, projecting emotions, and so they're popularly linked with the subjunctive as well. Similarly, there are certain verbs that also project feelings. So we have temer right here, which means to fear. So for example, I fear that I will have a bad dream or something like that. To be afraid of, similarly, tener miedo de. Sorprenderse de, of course, to be surprised. To be glad. To feel. To be sorry for. And then gustar, of course, to like. Encantar, to love. Odiar, to hate. And molestar, to annoy. So once we're using any of these verbs, oh, I like that the school is modern, that is a subjunctive sentence because you're stating your emotion about another thing. So the sake of this video is not only to have you understand what the subjunctive is and how it's to be used, but also to learn some of the words and the vocabulary that we need to ensure that we can identify it and use it properly. So W is for wants and E is for emotions. Now let's look at what I is for. The I in weirdo stands for impersonal expressions. And these are a number of impersonal expressions. Let's look at them. It is important that, es importante que, es necesario que, it's necessary that, es preciso que, and es menester que also both mean it's important that. So once we see any of these expressions, they'll be followed by the subjunctive conjugation. Similarly, we have it's possible that, it's probable that, it's impossible that. And then the final two at the bottom, es mejor que or más vale que, both mean it's better that. It's better that this happens. So all of these are impersonal expressions. It doesn't identify a particular subject, and so that is why it's called impersonal. But once we see them, we know that what will follow it will be the subjunctive conjugation. That's right. Now let's move on to R. The R in weirdo stands for recommendations, requests, and I've also piggybacked on suggestions and advice because they can all be paired up with recommendations and requests as well, don't you think? Once we're recommending something or requesting, suggesting, or advising someone else about something else, we will need a subjunctive, and the verbs that we can learn as it relates to this particular function are as follows. So the first one is sugerir, to suggest, and I use this verb so often on my channel. Sugiero. So it is definitely subjunctive, and that is why I have placed E to IE here to remind us that this E would change to IE. It is a subjunctive verb. Yo sugiero que, I suggest that. So that's our first verb. To suggest, to recommend, to advise. Now, mandar and ordenar is to send or to order. Exigir, to demand. I demand that you give me back my money, for example, would be a subjunctive sentence because we're using the verb exigir and because we're using the function of requesting that someone else does something. Decir, similarly, is the same thing, to say, to tell someone to do something else, right? To insist. And then pedir is to ask for. Similarly, or expressions. It is recommended that, es recomendable que, it's recommended that we do our homework. That will be a subjunctive sentence. Es aconsejable que, it is advised that we study hard for our exams. That too would also be a subjunctive sentence because of the existence of that expression and the formation and use of this particular function. Are we getting it? I really hope we are because I am here sounding like a scratched record. I really hope we're getting it. Once someone else is asking, recommending, wanting, expressing emotion about something else or someone else, we would need the subjunctive. And it's called a subjunctive because it may or may not happen. Now, enough about R. Let's move on to D. The D in weirdo stands for doubts, denial, and disbelief. I doubt that the teacher will come to class. I deny that the card isn't working. And I don't believe that this is happening right now. Those are all subjunctive sentences, in English, of course. And they would be the same in Spanish. Our verbs in focus here are dudar, which of course means to doubt. Yo dudo que, I doubt that. No creer, to not believe. No creo que, I don't believe. Let's move on to no pensar, I don't think that. If you don't think that something is happening, that's also disbelief. And so that can also work here with this function. Negar, which is a stem changing verb from E to IE, yo niego, is to deny, while pensar, once again, is to think. But if you're asking it as a question, do you think that, that is also disbelief and a space for the subjunctive to be used. The only expression from this particular function is es dudoso que. What do you think es dudoso que means? You said it. Es dudoso que means it is doubtful that this particular thing might happen. Let's move on to the final letter in weirdo. And this final letter is actually easier than we think. It stands for one word, and that one word is ojalá. Ojalá. And ojalá means hopefully. If you see anything following ojalá, it will be in the subjunctive mood because ojalá is a subjunctive trigger word. Hopefully it rains tomorrow. The it rains would be in the subjunctive mood. So we have just explored all the major functions of the subjunctive by looking at the acronym WEIRDO. But now we really need to go into talking about how. How is it that the subjunctive is used? Let's look at the subjunctive in context. To set up the subjunctive, there are 3 things that must be in the sentence. How about you tell me what the first thing would be, because we just spoke about it. That's right, the first thing would be one of the setup verbs or expressions. The setup verb or the setup expression comes at the beginning of the sentence in the first clause. So once we see any of the setup verbs, to want, to desire, to recommend, to suggest, to doubt, ojalá, we will know that, oh yes, that's the first thing that would form a subjunctive sentence. So when we're identifying the subjunctive, we can look for this. And when we're ready to use it, we should ensure that we're using one of these functions. For example, mis padres quieren, my parents want, coming from the W. And es recomendable, it is recommended, coming from the function are, right? So that's the first thing we need. The second thing we will need is the word que. Mis padres quieren que. My parents want that. Or it's recommended that. Es recomendable que. Now this que is going to be like a preface for the subject change. That's right, the third thing that we will need to set up a subjunctive sentence is a subject change. I want you to do something. He wants them to do something. So our example reads, mis padres quieren que yo lave los platos cada noche. My parents want that I wash the dishes every night. Therefore, if we're using any of the setup verbs and we're talking about the same subject, for example, my parents want to go to Italy next month, or I want to wash the dishes, there is no subject change. And so it's not a subjunctive sentence, it is just the present tense. In that case, it will just be followed by the infinitive. So this is very, very major. There must be a subject change. I want you to do something. They want us to do something. He wants them to do something. So therefore, the subject change must exist. Let's look at what that would look like. This is a subjunctive sentence. What's the first thing that we see? Of course, it is our setup verb. What function does that come from? The R, definitely, to recommend. So I recommend, we recognize that setup word there. That's the first part. The second part we have here is our que, and then we have the subject change. So you'd realize that the first subject was I recommend. It's in the yo form, and now it's you. So it is a subject change because it's no longer I. So we're not saying I recommend that I recommend that you, or they, or them, or we. It has to have another subject here, another pronoun, another person than the person here. I recommend that you clean the kitchen. So this is the second clause we've been talking about, and now it's time to jump right into what is the second clause. How does the subjunctive look? How is it formed? Now, before we get into all of that though, this is our subjunctive verb. This is where we would place the verb in its subjunctive formation. So this is the subjunctive conjugation for you clean, limpies. The subjunctive is therefore the opposite of the present tense in Spanish. So the formula, just to recap here, is the setup word or phrase in the present tense, que, or subject change, and then or subjunctive conjugation. Are you getting it? Go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section that says, I'm understanding, so that I know that you're on the same page as I am. Now that we've spoken about the setup phrases and words and what the subjunctive sentence would look like, it's time to talk about how to place the verb in the subjunctive conjugation. How do we form it? Let's jump right in. The first thing we're going to look at are AR verbs. Now, it's very important to know well the present tense if we're going to know well the subjunctive tense, because the subjunctive actually mirrors the present tense. It's kind of like looking in a warped mirror, but it's not exactly the same, but it's copying it in a way. So, the present tense endings of the AR verbs are o, as, a, amos, an. This is the subjunctive mode. What do we notice?
Huh?
Now, what I mean by the subjunctive uses the opposite of the present tense is that if you notice, these are AR endings. The form is o, then we have as, a, amos, and an, all using a to reflect AR verbs. However, the opposite of AR verbs, as I like to think about it, in this case would be the ER endings. So the subjunctive switches the endings. The AR endings are basically now the ER endings. Sorta, kinda. The yo form was an O for the present tense, but for the subjunctive, it's now E. Now, what we can use to remind ourselves of what to do is that for the AR verbs, we're using ER endings. And so the yo form will begin with E, and then we would switch out all the A's for the following conjugations, as, a, amos, an, to se, amos, en. So we're switching all the A's for E's. Does that make sense? So we're switching the endings. Let's look at an example. So this is bailar in the present tense. Yo bailo, tú bailas, él, ella, usted baila, nosotros bailamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes bailan. Now let's see what we're understanding so far. How would we switch the verb bailar to the subjunctive conjugations? Remember, AR verbs would use ER endings. The yo form would take the E, and then it would switch out all the A's for E's. Pause the video right here to see if you can change each of these conjugations to the subjunctive mood. Are you ready to see what that would look like? Okay, let's go. So in the subjunctive mood, bailo would be baile, bailas, bailes, baila, baile, bailamos, bailemos, bailan, bailen. So as you can see, we switched out all the A's. That is what we mean by opposite ending. It's basically no longer an AR verb because it's kind of warped. It's kind of like we're living in an upside down world, and so it's not the way it used to be anymore. It has taken an opposite twist. Similarly, I hope we're getting it so far, the ER verbs would turn to the AR endings. So the ER endings in the present tense would be O, S, E, emos, en. Just like what we just did, the ER verbs would now take AR endings, starting with the yo form, which actually starts paving the way. So it would be a, as, a, amos, an. So the O is no longer O. It changed to a to kind of point you in the direction that, oh, we're going to be using primarily A's. the opposite of ER verb endings. And then we went on and switched out all of the E's in the S, E, emos, N to A's. As, a, amos, an. Now let's go ahead and look at another example. This is comer in the present tense. Go ahead and pause the video to see if you could put comer in the subjunctive mood. What would the conjugations look like? Are you ready? That's right. So we start by switching out the yo form to an A ending. Opposite, right? Then we switch out all the E's for A's. So comes becomes comas, come becomes coma, comemos becomes comamos, comen becomes coman. Now, IR verbs basically follow the ER endings. These are the endings for IR verbs in the present tense. And as you can see here, they're the same as what the ER endings in the subjunctive mood would be. So that's one less thing to learn. So ER and IR verb endings are the same in the subjunctive. They're both a, as, a, amos, an. In that case, let's move right along to our example. Our verb in question is vivir, yo vivo, tú vives, él, ella, usted vive, nosotros vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes viven. Go ahead and pause the video one last time to see if you're understanding what the opposite endings or the subjunctive endings would be for this verb here, vivir. Remember, IR endings are the same as what the ER endings would have been in the subjunctive mood, which are primarily the endings for the AR verbs. Now let's look at the subjunctive conjugations for the verb vivir. So yo would be viva, vivas for the to form, viva for the él, ella, usted, vivamos for nosotros, and vivan for ellos, ellas, ustedes. Because what we have just done is switch out all of the E's for A's, primarily. To recap, these are the present tense endings of regular verbs in the present tense. You can go ahead and pause the video just to mull them over a bit. Do you remember what these endings would be in the subjunctive mood? Let's take a last look. That's right. AR endings would primarily have E's, so E, S, E, emos, N, while ER and IR endings would primarily have A's. A, as, a, amos, an. And these are for all the regular verbs in the subjunctive. Now, if we go back to this example, we would realize that the verb we had used there in bold was limpiar, to clean, and it is an AR verb. And we have changed what it would have been in the present tense, limpias, an AR ending, to limpies. So therefore, we're not using the A ending anymore because we're using the opposite ending, meaning the E ending instead, because we are in the subjunctive mood, aka upside down land. Now that we've spoken about the endings of the subjunctive conjugations, let's talk a little bit about the subjunctive stems. Verbs mirror the yo form of the present tense, and they use opposite endings, which we just said. But let's talk about it a little deeper. For example, if the verbs are stem changing in the present tense, they will also stem change in the subjunctive. So we're following everything that happens in the present tense. Now, whatever changes are made in the yo form in the present tense, we would use the same irregular stem to form the present subjunctive. So when I say that the subjunctive mirrors the present tense, I mean it mirrors it entirely. The stem would be the same. If it's stem changing, it would also be stem changing. If it had some irregularity, it would also have the irregularity in the subjunctive. However, what is to be noted here most of all is that we're looking primarily at what the verb was in the yo form. So we're looking at the yo form and going from there. Let's look at a couple of examples. Here we have a number of irregular stems. Some of them are stem changing, some of them are go-go verbs. Go-go verbs change only in the yo form. We also have verbs like conocer, which has a particular irregularity only in the yo form. So I have chosen these verbs to show us how they would look in the subjunctive. So preferir is the first verb. Preferir is stem changing, so it becomes yo prefiero. Similarly, that stem change would also reflect in the subjunctive, and then we would have our ending as we discussed earlier. Poder is also stem changing. Yo puedo, it would also be stem changing in the subjunctive. Yo pueda. And because it was an ER verb, it would have the A ending. It was an IR verb here, it would have the A ending. So we already hopefully would understand what the endings are. What I'm basically showing you right now is the fact that if it had some irregularity or stem change in the yo form of the present tense, that would also reflect in the subjunctive mood. Here is another stem changing example. Dormir, an IR verb which stem changes from O to UE. So tu duermes is our example from the present tense. It would be tu duermas. So we had stem changed again, and then of course it was an IR verb, so we have our opposite ending. Now we have here two examples of go-go verbs. In the yo form, hacer is yo hago. In the yo form, tener is yo tengo. We will use the yo form to form the subjunctive. So in the subjunctive, it's not going to be hacer again, it's going to be yo haga, tú hagas, haga, hagamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes, hagan. So we're jumping and moving with what it was in the yo form, what that irregular stem was, which is ag, and we're adding on the endings as we discussed earlier. So we're using the irregular stem to form the subjunctive. What was the stem of every verb possible in the present tense of the yo form? And then we would take that irregular stem, translate it to the subjunctive, and add on our opposite endings. It seems more complex than it actually is. So I really hope you're understanding, and if you've made it to this part of the video, please go ahead and comment I'm understanding or I'm here. Okay, so we have conocer, which means to know. And every verb in Spanish in the present tense that ends in CER would attract the letter Z before the C and then the ending O, only in the yo form. So other verbs like this one are pertenecer, to belong, agradecer, to be grateful. So they would also mimic this rule of having that Z. Similarly, the Z would reflect in the subjunctive because the subjunctive mirrors what's going on in the present tense. Okay, so there we have it. It would become conozca, conozcas, conozca, conozcamos, conozcan. It takes the irregular stem and it continues with it throughout every conjugation. The final example there is from a reflexive verb, acostarse. And reflexive verbs in the infinitive are identified by their se at the end, which is basically just to show us how that action is being done to oneself. Now this se becomes reflexive pronouns me, te, se, nos, and se. Now that's all that we really need to know. That's different from what we said before because acostarse is a stem changing verb. Similarly, that would reflect in the subjunctive. So acuesto becomes aquest, the same irregular stem that we would run with throughout the subjunctive formation. So our biggest takeaway from this particular section is that whatever irregularity there was in the present tense of the yo form, it would reflect in the subjunctive and also form all of the conjugations. Now, there are 6 irregular verbs in the present subjunctive, whereas we cannot look at the verb in the yo form and run with it. We have to just learn that, oh, this is irregular, it's different, this is how it is, I will just have to learn it. Now, we can use the acronym DISHES to remember what these verbs are. The verbs are dar, from D, ir, saber, haber, estar, and ser. All of these verbs would be irregular in the subjunctive. Now, if we think about what these verbs would be in the yo form of the present tense, they're already pretty irregular. Dar would have been doi, ir would have been voi, saber would have been se, haber would have been e, estar would have been estoy, and ser would have been soy. So they're already irregular in the present tense. So of course they would also be irregular in the subjunctive. Now, as you can see, these look entirely different from what we have ever seen, but we just have to know them and learn them. So dar would be de, des, de, demos, den. Ir, which is very popular, vaya, vayas, vaya, vayamos, and vayan. Saber, to know, would be sepa, sepas, sepa, sepamos, sepan. Haber, which is to have, haya, hayas, haya, hayamos, and hayan. Estar, which is to be, este, estes, este, estemos, estén. All but the nosotros have that little accent. And for ser, which is also to be, would be sea, seas, sea, seamos, and seyan. So these are our 6 verbs in the subjunctive, which would be completely irregular. There are other subjunctive language that we, however, need to also note. The following phrases can also suggest the use of the subjunctive mood because they express something that is not guaranteed to exist. It's also an uncertain or hypothetical scenario. So these 3, although they are not the only 3 sentences, they are very popular subjunctive language as well. ¿Conoces a alguien que? Do you know someone who? No hay nadie que? There's no one who. Busco alguien que? I am looking for someone who. These all suggest subjunctive conjugation. So whatever follows these phrases would be in the subjunctive conjugation. And anything that looks or sounds like these 3 statements would also be more than likely the subjunctive. And that's all there is. Now let's therefore practice what we just learned. Vamos a practicar. More importantly, we're going to see if we understand how to change the verbs to their subjunctive forms. Vamos. Please go ahead and pause the video right here to try these 5 questions on your own. And then you can unpause to see what the answers are. Alright, vámonos. Número 1. Quiero que tú me digas la verdad. Now we're going to talk about each of these answers and explain why they're the answers that they are. So decir in the yo form would have been digo. Yup, it would have been stem changing, E to I, and it's also a go-go verb, digo. So the first thing you should do when you're approaching any of these is think about what the verb would be in the yo form of the present tense. Digo would therefore be diga, it's an IR verb. It would be diga, digas for the to form, which is our answer here, to form. Diga again for the él, ella, usted. Digamos for the nosotros, and digan for the ellos, ellas, ustedes. So I want that you tell me the truth. So we can also identify the subjunctive in context here, or set up verb, the word que, a subject change, and then our subjunctive formation. Número dos is from the function I, which is impersonal expression. It is important that they study a lot. This one is just a regular AR verb, and so of course the AR ending would now be E. In the present tense, it would have been estudian, and now it's estudien. Number three, ojalá. That is our setup word. Hopefully we have good luck. Tener in the yo form would have been tengo, and so it's mimicking that. Nosotros tengamos, using the same irregular stem from the present tense. Number four, it is necessary that she eats well before the match, partido. Comer, a regular ER verb, and so it's A for our ending, because in the present tense, there would have been an E here, and we're switching out the E's for A's, opposite. Number five uses an irregular verb, ser. I doubt that you all are so fast. Now, ser is irregular, and we just have to learn what it is. In the ustedes pronoun, it would have been sean. How did you do? I really hope that you did well. Let's do another set before we go. Once again, go ahead and pause the video to try these on your own. Remember that you have to think about what the verb would be in the yo form. Also, what irregularities are there? Are they stem changing, irregular, or just regular verbs? All things for you to think about as you attempt these questions. Okay, now it's time to look at the answers. Number 6. I don't believe that Marta can end today. So poder is stem changing, UE, so we need that irregular stem. Then it's an ER verb, so we need an A instead of an E here. So whatever it is in the present tense, if it helps for you to write it in the present tense first, then you just switch the ending to the opposite. That can also be a strategy that you can use. Number 7, I hope that you live near here. Vivir is a regular IR verb. The to form would have been vives, so it's now vivas. Number 8, my parents insist that I do the work early. Hacer in the yo form is a go-go verb. Hago therefore becomes haga because it was an ER verb, so now we need an A. Number 9, busco. I am looking for a friend that knows how to play the guitar. This is a setup language. I am looking for someone that. Saber is one of those irregular verbs. So sepa is our irregular conjugation that goes with the él, ella, usted pronoun to match amigo. And finally, number 10, it is better that we don't go alone. Ir is another irregular verb. So vayamos is the conjugation for nosotros. I really hope that we did well with these sets of questions. I really hope also that you understood what we did today and that you have a better understanding of the subjunctive mood in Spanish, how to form it, how to identify it, and how to use it. I also hope that you know what the conjugations are. Please go ahead and watch this video as many times as possible so that you can revise the different language, the different verbs, the different expressions, and especially the different conjugations. That's where we'll end today's video on the present subjunctive in Spanish. Gracias por mirar. Adiós, chicos. Until next time. Ciao, ciao.